Welcome to Resilience in Life and Leadership with your host, Stephanie Olson, speaker, author, and resiliency, addiction, and sexual violence expert. Hello, and welcome to Resilience in Life and Leadership. I'm Stephanie Olson, super excited to be here with you, especially live in the Outlaw Streamer studio. So this is fabulous. And I want to talk about a couple of things today that I typically don't talk about, but I do think this has a topic of resilience attached to it. So next time, we're going to talk a little bit about a documentary that is on Netflix right now on Pornhub. And so we're going to have a conversation. So I'll give you some homework. If you get a chance to watch that, watch it before our next conversation, because I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. But I want to talk a little bit about the sexualization of children specifically, but the sexualization that's going on in our society as a whole. But it really seeps down to our kiddos and what they're experiencing. So let's have that conversation. I see so often now, again, just a reminder for many of you, as the CEO of an organization called the Set Me Free Project that does prevention education on human trafficking, social media safety, and healthy relationships, we talk a lot about sexual violence. We talk a lot about human trafficking, obviously, and how to really teach our kiddos how to have that intrinsic value or what that looks like in themselves, and how to really, I don't know. I mean, well, I know what we teach them, but I'm trying to equate this to the sexual violence and the sexualization of our children. Here's the deal. We wouldn't have a problem with sex trafficking if we didn't have a demand for sex trafficking, right? If we eliminated the demand, we would eliminate sex trafficking. So where does that demand come from? Well, it comes from that sexualization. And a lot of that comes from pornography. And so that's what I want to talk about a little bit. But that is even in of itself a controversial topic in the human trafficking industry, believe it or not. Our organization stands on sexting is not healthy. I would probably go as far as to say if you're an adult, probably don't do it, because I've seen a lot of senators get busted for some things. So just be careful with the whole sexting thing. Pornography is not healthy, and there is a link to human trafficking with that. And that sex work in and of itself is not the best, most viable profession, and that it does not do anything to elevate women, does not do anything to bring us into this control over men type mentality that so often people say is the case. Now, I say this is controversial because so many people will tell you in this industry that, yeah, sex work is a completely viable profession. And if I'm a woman and I want to be in sex work, I should own that. And it's kind of like taking back my power over the man because I get to control that. Or pornography is extremely healthy. It teaches us how to have healthy sex. It teaches us how to do all this stuff. And I would tell you, no. Absolutely not. So that's what I want to talk about today. I've got both Tim and Chris in the studio today, so I would love to hear your thoughts at any point. But when we talk about sexualization of children,
excuse me, since you did.
Okay, I did open the door. Yeah.
You actually heard people say that pornography is healthy?
Oh my gosh! So I went to a conference. The conference will be unnamed. But the conference was specifically directed to organizations that worked with children. And there was several different workshops available. And one of the workshops was specifically on sexting. And the conversation was that sexting is the healthiest sex for youth that you can have, because there's no, I mean, you're not going to get an STD from sexting. You're not going to, healthiest sex. That's what,
Now
go
that
ahead.
you mentioned the sexting that way, that is how they're pushing artificial intelligence on the younger generation. That's one of the biggest reasons to have a AI boyfriend or girlfriend.
Well, there's so much to that, right? There's so much to that. The other session, now, by the way, I was like the only person in the workshop who was like, but I have a question or a comment. So the other workshop I went to was on pornography, and how pornography, ironically enough, the only statistics that they quoted were statistics from Pornhub, by the way. So that'll tell you kind of the direction. But they were talking about how pornography is okay, I'm going to tell you kind of a graphic story, but this is an example of what was being taught. A woman who was in another workshop that this facilitator was doing said, I'm a mom of a 7th grade boy, and I don't know what to do. My boy loves boobs. Okay, well, first I would say, yay, he's a healthy boy, right? That's a great thing that you've got a healthy boy.
10 out of
Tim,
10,
you're older than 7th grade. Just
10 out of 10 7th grade boys polled all like boobs.
So here we go, right? That's a positive thing. Now, here's what the mom was asking. What should I do? Should I don't know. Do I introduce him to porn? Do I show him that? So then she said, oh, I know. I'll buy him and now this is a quote. I would never use this term. I'll buy him a titty magazine. That's what this mom said. Here, no, that's not where you would ever expect that to go, right? So, no, this is what the facilitator said to that. It was the most beautiful moment of revelation from this mom that I have ever seen.
Where's this kid's dad?
Well, I don't know, but my guess is this kid is now addicted to porn, or has totally freaked out about sex in its entirety, because how would you feel about your mom buying you a Playboy? That's just, gross.
No.
Weird.
I'm a guy. I've been a guy my whole life. And I know, especially in the 21st century, if a kid wants to see that, it's out there.
There's no reason for mom to buy that, right?
There's no reason to buy a magazine. But, what you're talking about is something that that I, as a father, have taken very serious from the moment my kids were able to communicate.
Absolutely.
And so, like I've done it in stages, and as my kids grow, I take them into a second stage. And a perfect example is that I have a 15-year-old right now, and he wants a girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And he's had a couple of girlfriends, short term and things. And the one thing that I keep stressing to him is that all of these feelings of wanting a girlfriend and wondering, will I get a girlfriend, and all this stuff, it's all very natural.
Very normal.
Because that's how we're wired.
Yeah.
Right?
For a relationship.
Men are wired to pursue. And so I always remind him that everything you're feeling, every other guy has felt this. You're not alone. And so it's especially in this era, because there are so many people that are promoting promiscuity as if that's what makes you happy and healthy.
Calling it healthy sex.
And I've also known 3 different porn stars. Mm-hmm. One of them is no longer with us. She took her own life because she felt so guilty, and it it just stripped her of all of her dignity.
Absolutely.
And no matter what the rest of us tried to tell her about, her worth, her self-worth, and how important she was to us, it didn't help. It truly steals the soul of women.
It really does. And there's so many reasons behind that. We were never meant to, go from one person to one person to one person. That was not how we were designed. But when you're talking about, and thank you actually, Chris, for saying that, because you've got to have those conversations, and you have to keep having those conversations in developmental stages. And when parents ask me, at what point should I begin the conversation of sex with my child? My answer is always, you should start so early that your child doesn't even remember that you had the initial conversation. It needs to be a conversation all throughout, because you do not want to give the impression that sex is a dirty, ugly thing. You just want to put it in the context of what is healthy and what is right. And I think that we are going off the deep end on some of this stuff right now. So now I'll tell you one more thing about this conference, and then this conference was overwhelming.
When is the next one? I want to go.
This was right before, oh my gosh, this was right before COVID and the country shut down. Maybe that, I don't know. So I started, as I continued to ask questions, they finally decided that they didn't want to talk to me anymore, so they would overlook me. But there was this conversation about, about pornography, and it kind of turned into this, whatever you do is good for you or is okay for you. And so I raised my hand and I said, so talk to me then about pedophilia. How do you equate that with what you're saying? And do you know, the facilitator said, well, have you heard of ethical pedophilia? That is a thing.
Here's what I want to know. What was the bar like at the hotel after all this was over?
I was gone.
It would be amazing.
I was out.
There must have been some crazy hooking up going on at this thing.
Yeah, I was out. It was, but this is what I say to people, because our organization doing prevention education on sexual violence, and although we're not talking about sex ed by any means, but sexual violence, human trafficking, all of those things, our kiddos need to know what it is and how to prevent it. And in order to know how to prevent it, you really have to know what it looks like. But when you've got organizations going across your state telling youth that sexting is healthy, and by the way, don't tell your parents that you're sexting, because they might not understand. Not that they might not agree, they just might not understand. And then when it comes to pornography, you just have to be real careful about the sites you go to, because you just, you just want to make sure that you're going to the healthy pornography sites. What is that?
Wait a minute. What is the difference between the healthy porn or the non-healthy porn?
There is none. And so what is always shocking, though, about organizations like this is that okay, now I want to know what you said. I saw a whisper back there between Chris and Tim.
I'll tell you. I just leaned over to Tim and went, tastes great, less filling.
Oh my gosh.
That's the healthy porn.
Oh,
it's, really, it's more low fat. It's low fat porn. We here at the Baker House.
Porn light.
We're more into
porn light.
Porn light.
We're into keto porn.
Keto porn.
It's all meat.
Keto porn. Oh God. Okay. Welcome to my second show on resilience and life and leadership with outlaw streamers.
Stephanie,
yeah.
I'm sorry if I get a little goofy on this topic, but what you're talking about.
Yeah.
is such a horror.
I know.
And I have
you have to bring humor into it. Seriously.
I have to say this. You know, I was in Houston for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about sex trafficking, that is, Houston is ground zero for sex trafficking. And I can tell you, I've seen it with my own eyes. In Houston, they have these little cantinas. They're bars that it's just lawless. So these bars stay open all night. But the thing is you go into these bars and there are young girls, they're underage girls, and they're forced to work in those places to pay off smuggling debts. And I've seen these back rooms where the girls take the men, and there's not even a bed. There's like old car seats and stuff. It's truly
right.
I still have nightmares.
And here's the reality about human trafficking, because now this show is produced in Omaha, Nebraska, right? So heartland, but we're a hotspot for human trafficking, for sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And so it is in our backyard. It truly is. It's happening every day. It's in our backyard. So how in the world do we justify sexualization that is going on, justify pornography, justify these things when it's a consistent problem among our youth? And now we see so many, this person just got arrested for sex with a minor, which is, by the way, not a thing. It's called rape. That's what that's called. And, this person just got busted because of being on child porn, also not a thing, called sexual abuse images. And so you see all this in the news on a daily basis that we're almost getting desensitized by it, which is really sad.
Yes. I think that also culturally we begin to excuse it.
Yes.
By changing the language.
Correct.
Right? You're no longer a pedophile, you're a minor attracted person.
Yes, you're right. You're right. And for some, and then the whole, this is something that always baffled me, the whole we can't be judgmental thing, right? And yet we are called to make judgments. We are called to determine if this is right or if this is wrong. But the same people who say we can't be judgmental might find pedophilia a little off-putting. And so that's okay to do. It's just, we are in a backwards place in this world right now, and we need to bring it back because our youth are suffering.
It doesn't help that, and Chris actually showed this on his show here on Outlaw Streamers, that there are professionals out there going on speaking tours promoting pedophilia.
Correct.
There's one guy who has actually said that every single living person has some level of sexual attraction to children, and they literally have it broken down. And they said that it doesn't matter who you are, where you are on the spectrum, every person has a sexual attraction to children. And that's what they're pushing right now.
Is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yep.
Not true. Not true.
Wow.
I can say I don't have a sexual attraction. I'm just throwing that out there.
Nope. Sure do not.
Yeah, I'm actually the exact opposite. I love geezers. No, I'm kidding. What I think is really important is that, especially through language, that we desensitize people to it.
We do.
And then people project that, oh, well, this is just the norm. It's just going to happen. But I can tell you that as a father, one of the things that I've impressed upon my sons is that, sadly, a lot of girls now, because they see these examples of, celebrities who send out nasty pictures. And so now young girls will do it too, because quote unquote cool. And the thing that I really talk to my kids about, my sons, is that if you get something like that, you have to delete it immediately. And if you send it to your buddy because you think it's funny, now you just committed a felony.
Yes, actually. And here's what I would say. You want to, and I agree with you almost. I think what you need to do is take it immediately to law enforcement, because now it kind of depends. So you're talking about, because what you're ultimately talking about is considered child pornography, right? So if you even minors share sexting, you're share, and I would only say take it to law enforcement if you're being inundated with something that you know. But you're right. So now you've got it on your phone, so you're in possession of it. You send it. Now you have delivered it. Now in Nebraska and some other states, I'm not sure what all of, we have decriminalized that, which I for minors specifically. Sorry, not for everybody. Let me be clear. If you have child pornography or sexual abuse images and you're not a minor, or it's not a sext, actually, it has to be sexting. That's decriminalized. Because, and I do actually agree with this, because you've got somebody who is doing this, that we have taught them that, as you know, people, we want to be a sexualized society. So, hey, yeah, sure. Somebody asked you for a picture, send it to them. But now for what we found is we had all of these minors who were charged with child pornography, and now they are sex offenders for the rest of their lives.
And that affects them
forever.
When they're trying to get a job.
Yep.
When they're trying to get into schools.
Yep.
I mean, and so, and again, these are the things I go over with my kids constantly, because you can't, this is not a one and done thing.
No, it can't be.
Because culturally, kids are encouraged to do this.
Correct.
So when you come in to try to talk to them about their dignity.
Yeah.
And how special this is supposed to be in a relationship, you're run out of the room. You're no fun. Everybody does it. It's a very tough battle.
Well, it really is. And that's why I think we need to step back as a society and say, okay, seriously, what are we doing to our kids? And what is going to be considered acceptable and what is not going to be considered acceptable? And it's a really tough time to be a parent, or anybody who is working, loves youth. So it really is. And I think part of what happened, we had, in the Puritan mindset back in the day, sex is dirty. Don't have that. Well, you don't want to teach that. It's a beautiful thing. It's in the right context. But you can't go to the other extreme and say, yes, this is just a casual thing. And, you've got the sex positive movement that is not talking about the fact that sexual relationship is going to involve more than just the physical act, but also emotional, all the other things.
I'd like to ask your opinion of this. This is something I talked to my 15-year-old about just recently. And that is that to a girl really, because we're talking about kids, when they, I'll use this term, when they give that up, so to speak.
Lose their virginity specifically?
Yeah, okay, we'll do it that way. Thank you, Stephanie. But that's what I've told my son, is that boys are programmed to mate. Mm-hmm. We're programmed. That's how God made us, to pursue. That's how come we can shoot deer every year, because we trick the bucks into thinking, hey, there's a chick over there. Boom. But I tell my son that as a male, you're designed to pursue. Girls are not designed to pursue; they're conditioned to pursue. So the thing that I told my 15-year-old is, just because he had a girlfriend at the time, and he was making reference to, she kept wanting him to come over when her parents weren't home, and I wouldn't let him go. And I told him, I said, bad things can happen. And I told him, I go, you don't want to be her first, because you don't know how that's going to affect her.
Right.
Because you're wired differently. I'm just curious, what do you think about that advice?
Well, I do think the female and male brain is wired differently. What I would say is that there is a true bond because of the way that we're made when you have sex with somebody. There's a bond. And I think that is the piece that people are missing. And so when you teach, and I would actually probably even go one step further and say the same for your son, because I see, the big breakup and the girl and the guy, and it is almost more impactful for the guy. I mean, like, it can destroy them. And so I think that we have to remember that sexual act is not just a physical act. It actually creates an emotional bond that is supposed to be, because that's, I mean, and I know a lot of people are like, well, animals mate with this or not person, hopefully. Animals mate, we're animals, right? Okay, but animals mate, don't go there. I'm not going there. Animals mate with this animal and this animal, but we are created at a higher level. I mean, that's just the reality.
I think something that is distorted is procreation and pleasure.
Yeah.
Animals, it's procreation.
Right. It's not about, right.
And in humans, it's pleasure.
Right.
And bragging rights.
Notches on the bell. And I do think that, I'm a Jesus girl. We were designed a certain way. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I mean, we were designed, when you look at the human body, how complex it is and all of those things. And I just think we have to be very mindful. And, there are real strong statistics with porn and with addiction and with sexual addiction and, all of those things. And so we just have to be remarkably mindful of that.
I told you, I've known some people, some girls in that industry.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, who's hysterically funny, was telling me that she said, the thing that's so stupid about it, she's no longer in that industry.
Right.
But she said the thing that was so stupid is the stupid stuff they would make us do.
Right.
People don't do this. People don't act like this. Guys don't walk into a convenience store and say, I'd like to get a Slurpee. Hey, what's your name? And then bang.
No, okay. And that's part of the problem with porn, is that it's not reality. And so you've got, there is a chemical reaction that happens when you view pornography. And so the more that you view it, the more that, those dopamine hits and all of that stuff, all the chemical stuff. But you also have this idea that, oh, that's how it's going to be. Or when I'm in a relationship, that's how it's going to look, or that's how my wife's going to be. That's not reality. And so that's an important piece of that puzzle.
A huge distortion of reality. And I've had this debate with guys, I don't know how many times. But one of the things I always tell them, you'll never have a woman like that.
No.
It will never happen.
No.
But what I think happens to men is that they think they should have that.
Right.
That women should do all these acrobatics and things. And it distorts their reality until I think that they lose the ability to communicate with people on a normal level.
Well, actually, the statistics show that the more pornography you view, the less actual sex you have, ironically enough, because you are conditioned to expect a certain thing. And so when that doesn't happen, you actually wind up having less sex. So I always tell, when I'm talking to youth about this stuff, I always say, so if you want to have sex, don't watch porn, because it's just going to mess you up. And so, I think that we need to do a better job. We were talking, Chris, you and I were talking before this about even like dance competitions or, child beauty pageants and things like that. And my daughter is an adult, but she is now a professional dancer. And we did the dance competitions, but she danced for an organization that was they were very well trained. Ballet was number one. And so their technique was really important in these dance competitions. Unfortunately, in a lot of competitions, technique is not that important. And it's how well you can twerk or how well you can do this or whatever. And a lot of those dancers that aren't trained correctly wind up with hip problems, like in their 20s or 30s. I mean, it's ridiculous. But because they were trained classically, and they would do contemporary and jazz and stuff like that, but because they were trained classically and because they weren't on the stage twerking and doing the things, they would lose a lot of competitions. Now, when there was a judge that was classically trained, they would win. It was really interesting. But if you had the hip hop judges or you had the judges that were not trained classically, they would lose. And so I think, what is that saying? And I was at a dance competition. This was group of 9-year-olds doing a dance to, albeit a great song, Chicago, the musical Chicago, Cell Block 9, right? Yeah. Cell Block, yeah. And doing a competition to that, they were wearing thigh highs and garter belts and like they were dressed like you would be in Chicago, right? In the musical Chicago, which, by the way, those are adults dressed like that. These 9-year-olds were dancing to Cell Block Tango. That's what it's called. I don't know where Cell Block 9 came from. Cell Block Tango, right? And they were dancing to this song, and it was horrifying. It was horrifying. Our whole team was watching that going, who says yes to that? A group of 9-year-olds. And so what are we teaching our kids? They did very well, by the way, in the competition.
You think it could be a part where adults are living vicariously through the children?
Maybe.
In that they felt that, oh, well, this is now the cool thing.
Yeah.
So why not put the 9-year-olds in the garter belts and stockings?
Right. I know it's horrifying, but I think this too, and this is kind of a jump, and then we'll next time talk about that Pornhub documentary. But I think too, this is why it is so hard to, and specifically in this area, be a woman in this society, because the expectations put on women to look a certain way, to dress a certain way, to fit in, I'm going to look like the magazines. And so then we're talking about eating disorders. We're talking about surgery. We're talking about things that, instead of talking about what's important, you have an intrinsic value that you can't change, and it doesn't matter. Not to say that you shouldn't eat healthy, not to say that you shouldn't take care of yourself, but it should never be for the reason that society is putting on us. And so I think we have to really step back and take a look at what we're doing with our children, our boys and girls, because the sexualization of our kiddos is rampant right now.
I also think something else important to look at is how culturally people are accepting of abuse of women.
Yes.
The people accept it.
Right.
You know, if for example, when a girl gets roofied,
right,
know,
right,
and then a bunch of guys take advantage of her.
Absolutely.
I mean, you hear these stories on a regular basis, and I can remember years ago, if something like that happened, people would feel sorry for the girl.
Yeah.
Now it's, well, she shouldn't have been there.
What
she
you
should
do?
have been hanging out with
yeah.
those people.
What you wear? It's true, and I think that goes back to you know, blaming the victim for something that's going on. And I always tell, you know, when it comes to things like rape, when it comes to things like sexual violence, I always tell, I should be able to. Now I'm not going to do this, and I would be stupid to, and it's chilly, but I should be able to stand outside buck naked, right, and not fear that somebody's going to rape me, because not a good idea to stand outside buck naked. And as Amanda Burns found out, you go to jail, right? So that's not a good idea. But that's what we need to get through to our kids. You don't get to, just because somebody's doing something stupid, you, whether it's stupid or not, you don't get to victimize them. You don't get to assault them. You don't get to take advantage of them. And so that's kind of the other side of the coin. So yeah,
I think that it's, and I don't think there's really a fix to it, but it's so inconsistent.
It is so inconsistent.
It's so inconsistent.
Yes.
For example, if a guy, like if I went into a room of girls and started going, "Hey, you're hot, let's do this, blah blah blah," well, they'd say, "Well, that Chris Baker's a pervert and he's sexually harassing people and things like that." But you take a stunning, handsome man like Brandon over here. If Brandon went in and did the same thing, they go, "Oh, he's such a goofball."
I always say sexual harassment is only a case when the person is ugly. No, and that's not even true. There are people who actually do harass, right? But you're right. It does change how we view things. Have you ever seen the show? I think it's like on the, I don't know, like the channel 48 Hour Dateline, but it's What Would You Do? Have you ever seen that show? I love that show. But one of the things that's so fascinating about that show is they'll show a scenario and see what the reaction of the people are, and then they'll talk to those people. But you take the same scenario and put a different gender, or you put somebody dressed in different clothes, or a different race, or whatever, and it changes the scenario entirely. And so I think we need to recognize that we do come with those, you know, those are biases that are real, but we have to remember that just because, I mean, if I am sexually harassed and the guy is hot or not, and it's sexual harassment, that's wrong, right? But we do have to remember that even if it comes from somebody who is attractive or somebody who's not, it's the same thing. It can't be different.
It's the act, not the actor.
Exactly.
And that's where I think we've lost the consistency.
Yeah.
Because the act is one thing. Well, who did it?
Right.
And what was the motivation? And how did we get here? And
right.
What trauma did this person have in their life where they just felt like this would be okay?
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying that trauma doesn't cause people to.
It does. Trauma's,
act out,
yeah.
But
it doesn't give you the right to do wrong.
Yeah, it's still the act, right? It's the act, not the actor, not to take a shot at thespians.
Well, which I am one. Yes, thank you. So,
by the way, Stephanie's wearing really, really awesome two-tone shoes today.
I really am. Well, in fact, speaking of thespians, my shoes are saddle shoes, which I just wore in the show I was in. You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, playing Lucy. So I'm just connecting those things. Cool shoes, thespian. Anyway, yeah. So anything else you gentlemen want to say? And Brandon, hello.
Actually, I do. Talking about sexualization of children, there's one entire market that has not been brought up in the whole show, is the sexualization of children in the schools.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Looking at the statistics while you guys were talking, in 2016, there was only 9,600 students that were assaulted across the entire country.
Okay.
A year later, that rose up to 14,938. That's in 2017, 2018.
Wow.
Do you know what it was last year?
What?
Last year, it has been, according to the Children's Bureau from the Department of Health and Human Services, so our own government, says that at least 9.2% of children were sexually assaulted in the schools across the country. There are over 49 million kids right now in the school system across the country. That means, if this number is right, almost 4 million kids last year alone are being raped, sexually assaulted, or harassed by educational professionals, not the students or their peers. These are the people that they are supposed to trust every day. K through 12. 4 million kids last year.
And this is why children, when I ask, I want you to think of 3 safe adults, they say, I can't think of one.
Yep.
And that's horrifying.
But we're also supposed to be told, and Chris and I have mentioned this and showed this on our show quite a bit, we're told that this sexualization in the schools isn't happening. But yeah, we're finding how, if it's not happening, how are 4 million kids being assaulted?
Well, and part of the problem, and I think that I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a school in Kansas, and it was a small town, and I was educating. I educated staff the night before, and then the next day I was educating the students on human trafficking specifically. And after one of my presentations with a group of junior or senior girls, one group approached me and said, we are having a problem because one of the kids in the class masturbates every day during the class, and no one does anything about it. And we've told...
What?
I know. It's not the first time I've heard that.
And it actually happened when I was in school, and all they gave him was in-school suspension for a week.
Yeah. So instead of recognizing there might be a problem here, maybe we need to address this, right? Yep. We're gonna make.
Imagine.
I know we're gonna tell you, ladies, that are uncomfortable with this, to just, you know what, we're working on it.
Yep.
It's just not acceptable. The same school, another group of girls approached me and said, we have a teacher in our school who every once in a while, like, it's mostly he'll look at us and make us uncomfortable, or he'll just touch us a little bit off or whatever. And he's older, and it's just, we don't know what to do. And I asked them, have you talked to anybody about this? Well, yeah, we've gone to administration. We've done this. We've done that. Nobody will listen.
Call lawyer.
Yeah. And I said,
where's the fathers?
Well, so it gets, I don't know. But so I told them that I would address it very specifically with both the principal that I was working with, and then there was somebody else that was part of it. So I did. The principal was like, The other person, who was kind of new to the school district, went to her husband and told them this. Her husband said, oh yeah, he's been around for 30 years. He's been doing it for that long. Everyone knew.
Just let it go.
And they just let it go.
It's another one of those cases excuse me, and I've told this to Chris earlier today, I was raised very old school. And old school, you just let the old men be old men.
Boys will be boys.
That'll die out, and blah, blah, blah. But even growing up at that, I don't, and I mean, maybe it's because of the 2 decades I spent watching stuff like this as a server in the hospitality industry. There is no excuse for that.
None.
And
you need to, but I think, and I want to say, the majority of educators are amazing people. I mean, I think that's important to address. And the majority of educators are there because they love kids and they're incredible people. And we do have, but we have an increase of this happening in the schools. And so I think it's really important to know that. But I think we need to also educate schools. How do you handle this stuff, right? How do you deal with it? How do you take care of it? So I don't know. I think this was a really good, important conversation that we could have for days. And so I would love to hear what you think. We're going to talk about Pornhub next week. But here's the thing. This is all about us being resilient. So this is all about, I mean, just like us, you know, the things going on in our world, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. And so what can you do to make a difference and be resilient in your own life, in your own workplace, but also in your own society, and make a difference for change? Thank you for joining me. I want to hear from you. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening. Please share with anyone you think will benefit from this podcast.